Unbeknownst to prison officials, convict number 2107 was planning an escape. And best of all was a foolproof plan. For the most part, that is. Unlike his last attempt that they thwarted, damn their eyes. No, this time, no matter how many guards they may have, no matter how tall the walls may be, no matter how far from home convict 2107 currently was, there was absolutely no way he was going to let these screws stop him. Hell, it took him decades to even get a good look at him. Not that he was all that much to look at these days, he allowed, fingering his tattered stripes. He was, in the words of one lawyer at his murder trial, disrobed of all fancy graces and exposed in the light of reality. A far cry, it would seem, from the other label they had once slapped on him, as the quote-unquote arch-fiend of treachery and blood. Disrobed and exposed, treachery and blood, whichever the case and whatever his condition, it sure didn't stop his fellow inmates from gawking at him. Looks of curiosity mostly, but disdain as well. Gazes of hatred that he readily and honestly returned. They were enemies after all, despite sharing the same fate, and there just wasn't a whole lot of his kind in this joint. Not enough for him to blend in, and certainly not enough to stop what was undoubtedly coming. You see, convict number 2107 had terminated far too many lives not to be sharing this prison with at least one or two of his victims' kinfolk. Somebody would make a move of retribution soon enough. Of this he was positive. Hell, it's what he would do. It was what he had done, the very thing that landed him here in this wretched swamp. Even more of a reason to hasten his escape, deny his enemies the pleasure. Looking north towards his homeland, the prisoner could almost see past the humidity and the tall pines. Could envision the open prairie he once roamed at will, back when the world and everything in it was within his grasp. And oh, what a life that was. He thought of his childhood, the good times and the bad. And for a moment he almost felt pity for his adversaries, growing up the way they did, stifled and constrained, never fully tasting of freedom. Peering at the prison gates, he recollected the first time he rode into battle with his father, and of the pride he felt the first time his own son accompanied him. He smiled thinking about that time they drove them cocky New Mexicans away from the walls with their tails stuck between their legs. How much chaos he himself caused by blowing on that white man's trumpet. Terrible sounding instrument, that. Nothing like the beautiful music his people made. Oh, how the girls of the village spoke of him when he returned from the raids. Willing maidens who knew how to make a man feel like a man. Yeah, those were the good days. Back when the buffalo were as numerous as the stars and you never had to venture too much off the beaten path to feed your family. No railroads or fences or filthy hide hunters back in them days. Weren't nobody but the people, Koiga, and the people always had plenty. Buffalo, antelope, elk, pronghorn, the literal fat of the land. Nothing like the gruel that passed for food in these parts. Not that it mattered much for convict 2107, as he had recently disavowed their poor excuse for sustenance. No longer willing to sully himself. Better to starve, he thought, watching a small bird light on a windowsill just a few feet away. Oh, but that he could fly like the birds. Be home in less than an hour if only he could soar on wings like eagles. The problem was, convict 2107 couldn't fly, at least not very far. But then again, he didn't have far to go. The guards would later say they heard a haunting chant, a deep guttural sound that reverberated off the halls of the prison hospital as convict 2107 sang his death song, an eerie melody followed by the loud crashing of glass, a thud, and then silence. The song was finished, and convict 2107 was finally free. What you just heard was my lackluster attempt at imagining the final moments of a Kiowa chief named Satanta. My name's Josh, by the way, and you are listening to the Wild West Extravaganza. It's worth noting that Satanta is the bastardization of the man's real name. My apologies to any Kiowa who may be listening. I'm sure I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but his actual name was Satant or Satante. It means white bear. And on October 11th, 1878, White Bear committed suicide by leaping from or through a second-story window at Huntsville State Penitentiary, freeing himself of this mortal coil, or at least that's how the story goes. But let's back up and just take a quick look at who Satanta was. Born sometime around the year 1820, Satanta was a very influential leader of the Kiowa people, well known for both his skills on the battlefield and at the negotiating table. Fluent in 5 languages, English not being one of them, newspapers at the time reported that even those who couldn't understand what Satanta had to say were still fascinated by the rhythmic tone of his voice. Matter of fact, he was so good at talking that he was at one point dubbed the Great Orator. Sounds to me like the guy should have had a podcast. Even the military brass liked him, to a certain extent. Government reports said, quote, his manly boldness and directness, along with a keen sense of humor, made him a favorite with army officers in spite of his known hostility to the white man's laws and civilization, end quote. Satanta was also one of the leaders of the first Battle of Adobe Walls back in 1864. Now, if you listened to the episode I did covering that battle, you may remember that there was a Native American that was causing all kinds of chaos with an army bugle. Now, this was allegedly Satanta. The soldiers would sound charge and he'd sound retreat. They'd sound retreat and he'd sound charge. Pretty soon, nobody knew what the hell was going on. In 1871, the old chief and his warriors laid in wait, debating on whether or not to attack an army ambulance with just a small guard. They passed, opting instead to wait for a bigger prize, which soon presented itself in the form of a wagon train. He and his Kiowa swept down, killing 7 of the 12 teamsters. Now, by the way, had they attacked that small army detail, without question they would have killed every man. One of which was none other than General William Tecumseh Sherman. How's that for a fun little piece of trivia? As it were, the attack on the Teamsters would go down in history as the Warren Wagon Train Fight. Happened about 40 or 50 miles northeast of Amarillo, Texas, just north of Highway 380. And it's this attack that saw Satanta get arrested and tried in civilian court. The first time, according to Justice Ken Wise, that Native Americans were tried in civilian court as criminals rather than dealt with as combatants. Now, Satanta, along with one of his compadres, would be found guilty and sentenced to death. That death sentence would later be commuted to life, and even that didn't hold up. Eventually, Satanta was released from prison and sent back to the Kiowa. I guess the idea was that maybe it would appease some of the other warriors and give them less of a reason to keep on raiding. I mean, even Satanta had warned, quote, I am a great chief among my people. If you kill me, it will be like a spark on the prairie. It will make a big fire, a terrible fire. But you know how it goes. It wasn't long after Satanta's release that he was back on the warpath. The man was on parole when he participated in the second Battle of Adobe Walls. Although, to hear him tell it, he was not actually doing any of the fighting. He was just there to coach the youngsters, sort of an advisory role. Nevertheless, Satanta was soon thrown back in prison, this time for good. And less than 4 years later, he would commit suicide by jumping out of that window. Now, that's a very quick overview, and I know I didn't even get close to doing the story justice. But speaking of justice, if you'd like to learn more, well, you are in luck. Justice Ken Wise recently released an excellent 3-part series on his podcast, Wise About Texas, titled The Indian Trial. It's a really good in-depth look at the events leading up to Satanta's arrest and the trial that followed. And Ken Wise knows a thing or two about trials, seeing how he's a former judge and a current justice on the 14th Court of Appeals. He's also a great podcaster and a lover of history. So give that series, The Indian Trial, a listen. I think you'll like it. And while I was already familiar with the death of Satanta, I did learn a lot about the actual trial. The prosecution's opening statement, especially interesting to me, by the way. And it was this series that inspired this episode, so thank you, Justice Wise, for helping to spur on my imagination. Link to his series, this episode's show notes. Now, even though I made an attempt to sort of put myself in Satanta's shoes there at the beginning, obviously there's no way I or anyone else will ever know what was going on through his head during his last moments. A freeborn Kiowa, a man of high regard and authority, destined just to rot in prison far from home, never to see his loved ones again. I'm reminded of a Johnny Cash song called The Wall, off his Live at Folsom Prison album. It's about this strange convict who spent his time staring at the prison walls, saying that although, nobody had been successful in escaping, he'd be the first. And despite even the warden telling the prisoner that he'd die if he so much as touched that wall, he tried anyway. There's never been a man ever shook this can, but I know a man who tried. The newspapers called it a jailbreak plan, but I know it was suicide. I know it was suicide. Full disclosure, I can't sing. And not everybody buys the idea that Satanta committed suicide. Some of his own descendants think that it was not in his nature to do such a thing. They think that he was helped through that window by some guards and maybe even other inmates. And as I alluded to in my fictionalized version of Satanta's last few moments, surely there were some guards or inmates there at Huntsville who had the motive. We're talking Texas in the 1870s. Many families were touched by the Kiowa and Comanche raids. You might not have lost a family member, but there's a good chance that you knew somebody who had. So yeah, maybe Satanta was murdered, and the whole suicide angle was just a cover-up. However, in the book Satanta, The Life and Death of a War Chief, author Charles M. Robinson III poses, quote, "It would have been in character for Satanta, in his last act as a Kiowa warrior, to deprive the whites of victory by taking his own life. They had his corpse, but not his obedience. And for a warrior, that is an honorable death." End quote. Another author, Clarence Wharton, wrote in his book History of Texas that Satanta, quote, "saw no hope of escape. For a while, he was worked on a chain gang which helped build the MK&T Railway. He became sullen and broken in spirit, and would be seen for hours gazing through the prison bars towards the north, the hunting grounds of his people." End quote. Then you have Satanta's old comrade in arms, another Kiowa chief named Satank. Now, this Satank guy was supposed to stand trial with Satanta, but wasn't willing to allow himself such a humiliation. He gnawed his wrist to the bone in order to slip out of his chains and, singing his death song, attacked the soldiers that were guarding him with a knife that he had hidden away. The old warrior was successful in stabbing one guard and wrenching a rifle from another before he was finally gunned down. A brave death that some likened to suicide by cop. Satank had even told his family that they could find his body along the trail to Fort Richardson, where the trial was to be held. So, he knew it was not an escape attempt. He knew he was going to die. And finally, there's the story that Satanta, while in prison there in Huntsville, had tried cutting his own wrist and towards the end had even stopped taking food. Look, I don't know whether or not Satanta killed himself, but I do think all the ingredients were there. The kind of hopelessness that'll cause a man to escape from prison the only way he knows how. Kind of like that prisoner from the Johnny Cash song. Either way, I thought it would make for an interesting story to share with you. A little morbid for Christmas, yes, but still interesting. At least I hope that you find it interesting. And when it comes to the Wild West, it just does not get much more wild than the Kiowa. By the way, if Satanta's death sounds familiar, then you may be thinking of the death of Blue Duck in Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove. Mr. McMurtry was a student of Texas history, and I'd be very surprised if he didn't use Satanta's death as inspiration for that scene. Now, Satanta was buried there in Huntsville, and there his body lay all the way until 1963, when his grandson, noted artist James Alchua, had the old chief reinterred at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Ironically, two of Satanta's own sons joined the army after their father's death, serving in the 7th Cavalry of all units. And I say ironically because we all know that the 7th Cav was Custer's regiment. And Satanta and Custer knew each other well. Matter of fact, Custer even had Satanta arrested at one point, even trying unsuccessfully to hang the chief. When Custer soldiers attacked Black Kettle's Southern Cheyenne, resulting in what's now known as the Washita Massacre, Satanta's son-in-law was present, a guy by the name of Trellin the Enemy. And that's a story all of its own right there. Evidently, this Trellin the Enemy was instrumental in saving numerous innocent lives, holding off the soldiers with just his bow as the women and children fled down a creek bed. And he would go on to become a cowboy and even a police officer in Anadarko, Oklahoma. Died an old man in 1925. That's right, baby. Yes, he did. My daughter is waking up. Gonna have to wrap this up, y'all. As far as Satanta's soldier sons are concerned, they did serve honorably. And upon their discharge, they presented their captain with a gift, Satanta's war shield. And this shield is really fascinating. The story goes that it was made in the late 1700s, decades before Satanta was born. Passed down from one generation to the next, it was carried into battle over 100 times, even as far away as Mexico. Now, I did find a picture of what I think may be this shield on display at the Phoebe Hearst Museum of Anthropology in Berkeley, California. I did a little more digging, and it seems that this shield may have been returned to Fort Sill, where Satanta is buried, but I'm not sure. I'm not even sure that this is the shield in question, or just a shield used during a sacred Sundance. If you know anything about this shield, if you have any information, please email me at wildwestextra@gmail.com. Look, I could talk for another hour on Satanta. His life, his death, his family. Truly fascinating stuff. And I know I say this a lot, but it wasn't that long ago. Satanta was born in 1820. That's only 2 people ago, right? You just heard me say how his son-in-law, who fought George damn Custer, died in 1925. There's people alive right now who were alive in 1925. Satanta's grandson, James, the one that had his body reinterred, died in 1974. The grandson of a Kiowa war chief still alive when Elton John was singing Benny and the Jets. And I didn't want to pry, but I'm willing to bet that Satanta has some great-grandchildren who are still alive right this very moment. The Wild West just wasn't that long ago. And I guess that's about all I've got on the death of Satanta. Like I said, if you're interested in learning more, hit up my show notes and check out the Wise About Texas podcast and his series, Indian Trial. By the way, if you ever want to know more about anything I'm talking about, always check out my show notes. I try to link any interesting articles that I find while preparing for the episodes. All right, with that out of the way, if you're a longtime listener, you know that I'm currently on a bit of a hiatus right now. But I did want to at least touch base one more time this year, so consider this my way of saying Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Flying Spaghetti Monster, whatever, Happy Holidays. It's also a great excuse for me to extend one final thank you for the year. The Wild West extravaganza ain't exactly Joe Rogan experience. But it was really cool getting those messages from y'all showing how this podcast was in your Spotify top 5 of the year. Hell, according to Spotify, 133 of you listened to the Wild West extravaganza more than any other podcast. That number really blew my mind. Yeah, I know. My daughter's even into it. And while I'm not exactly destroying the charts or anything, according to my host site's analytics, I did receive over 150,000 unique downloads this year. And that's just via podcasting apps. 88 different countries, by the way. That's so crazy to me that somebody in Latvia or Uzbekistan, even Iran, downloaded my podcast. Bro, I got 10 downloads from Iraq, 14 from Uganda, another 14 from Gabon. And I don't even know where the hell Gabon is. When I look at my stats on YouTube, I'm likewise floored with gratitude. Over 630,000 views this year. I gained over 5,500 new subscribers, 41 different countries. So once again, thank you. We kicked off 2021 talking about Texas Ranger Frank Hamer's first gunfight. And here we are approaching Christmas, closing out 2021, and discussing the admittedly gloomy and kind of depressing death of Satanta. But then again, suicide is always an ugly topic, no matter the time of the year, but especially around Christmas. This can be a very sensitive time for a lot of people. You know, it's the holidays. We're supposed to be full of Christmas cheer and watching football and wearing ugly sweaters and whatever. But for some people, it can be a rough time. Maybe this is your first Christmas without a certain somebody. Maybe you're stressed out. Or maybe you're just all alone. I know sometimes we all get to feel in some kind of way. And I know it can be easy to start feeling hopeless. Kind of like Satanta, I would imagine. Like you're in a prison of your own mind. And I'm nobody, so I understand if you want to dismiss what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. These feelings will pass. The holidays will pass, and things do get better. This may sound corny, but I'm a firm believer that if you're still drawing in breath, if your heart is still pumping blood, it ain't over yet. You still got a purpose to fulfill, a destiny. You still have meaning. Your life still matters. That said, if you're struggling or you just need somebody to talk to, call 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-8255. That's the National Suicide Hotline, but you don't need to have a gun in your mouth to call. Just pick up the phone if you need somebody to talk to. They're there and they're ready to talk. Hell, send me an email if you need somebody to talk at. Click that contact button on my website, wildwestextra.com, or email me directly at wildwestextra@gmail.com. So that's it for 2021. Let's have us a Merry Christmas and kiss this crazy ass year goodbye. Once again, thank you. And a special thank you for everybody that's been supporting me on Patreon this whole time, even during the hiatus. Pat, Momo, Everett, Alphonse, Jamie, Michael, Tony, Kenneth, Man of Enchantment, Keith, Skinny Dick, R. David, Creature, Timothy, Eric, Reggae, Asher, Ryan, and Antonio. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope you'll join me the first Wednesday of 2022, January the 5th, when we will really get our thug thing going. That's right, we're really going to get our thug thing going with the Wild West extravaganza. I got some good stuff in the works. I think you're going to like it. All right, I'm done yapping. Thanks again. I'm going to go change the diaper. See you next year. Adios.